In the build up to Sony's E3 press conference, I wanted to upload a video that I owed you all a few months ago. After the E3 2016 gameplay demo for God of War reached 15 million views, the director Cory Barlog kept to his promise on Twitter and did something a bit special for the fans. The name of Kratos' son was finally revealed back in January, and this was done by putting it within the metadata of the audio file for the game's main title track. It tells us the theme is an introduction to Kratos and Atreus, with the name Atreus of course referring to his son. As everyone was quick to point out, this is a Greek name, not a Norse one. I know to a lot of people it seemed like a very random choice that runs counter to what we have been told so far, but there is a deep meaning behind it that makes perfect sense. In this video we will examine the implications of Kratos' son being named Atreus and what it might mean for the story. I thought we would start by taking a look at the House of Atreus in Greek mythology, and the story begins with Atreus' grandfather Tantalus. It was said that he committed such an atrocity against the gods that his descendants were cursed forever, and it's at this point that it already starts to sound familiar. Tantalus was one of Zeus's sons, and he enjoyed a good relationship with the gods until he killed his own son Pelops so that he could feed him to the gods as a way of testing how all-knowing they were. The gods knew what had happened as soon as they sat down, so they imprisoned Tantalus in Tartarus and resurrected Pelops. It was this action that started the cycle of betrayal, deception and murder that would poison the house of his family for many generations to come. Pelops is also sometimes credited for the curse that was put on his family, and this is because he betrayed the man who helped him win Hippodamia's hand in marriage by throwing him into the sea when he tried to get his reward. He cursed Pelops and his family with his dying breath, which further added to the family's curse. Pelops had several sons with Hippodamia, and among them were the brothers Atreus and Thyestes. These two brothers killed Chrysippus, an illegitimate son of Pelops, to please their mother, so they were banished to Mycenae. The two brothers competed against each other for the throne, with Atreus' wife Irope working with Thyestes behind Atreus' back. It was only with the help of Zeus that Atreus finally won. When Atreus finally learned of his wife's infidelity, he killed all of Thyestes' sons and cooked them for Thyestes to eat. Atreus followed in Tantalus' footsteps by killing and cooking his own relatives to be fed to someone else. Thyestes was then exiled for cannibalism, and he sought advice from the Oracle of Delphi soon after, who told him that if he were to have a son with his own daughter, that son would go on to kill Atreus, and this is exactly what happened. Atreus had two sons before he died, and they were Agamemnon and Menelaus, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with as the Greek leaders that fought in the Trojan War. Agamemnon was also affected by the curse, as his wife would later go on to have an affair during the time he was in Troy with Thyestes' own son. She would later kill Agamemnon when he got back from Troy by confusing him with a purple robe that had no opening for the head after he came out from a bath. So as you can see, this story is an example of the archaic Greek belief that guilt was inheritable and that a person's misfortune could be attributed to the crimes of an ancestor. The story of Oedipus was also similar as an example of this old Greek belief. He killed his father and unknowingly married his mother, which led to his sons killing each other and his daughter being buried alive. Now that we know that Kratos' son's name is Atreus, we can start to think about the overarching theme that the game will explore. Mythological Atreus was forced to carry the curse of his grandfather Tantalus, who had committed an atrocity against the gods, in the same way God of War's Atreus has to carry the weight of Kratos' dark lineage. This dark lineage of course refers to the cycle of destruction that Zeus started with the war against the Titans, which was then passed on to Kratos, who waged his own war against the Greek gods. Atreus is cursed to carry on this cycle of destruction in the same way that Kratos was, but this time it would involve the death of Kratos and the Norse world around him. If you have been following my videos, you'll know that this revelation has me very excited because it fits in with a number of things that we have analysed so far. The website already addresses this point when it says the following. Questioning the dark lineage that he has passed on to his son, he hopes to make amends for the shortcomings of his past. When thinking about this statement, it's easy to see why the name Atreus was chosen. The questions that follow on from this then get even more interesting. What would give Kratos the cause to question this in the first place? How do we know that his family's curse is passed on to Atreus when he is simply too young for us to be able to tell? If we distill the choice of this name down to its very basic meaning, it confirms that Atreus is in danger because the Norse gods know about Kratos and his past. This would certainly make sense if the events of God of War 3 really were the world-ending cataclysmic events that they were portrayed to be, as there would then be no reason for the Norse world to not be aware of who he is. When this is compounded by Ragnarok already being a big part of Norse mythology, it would logically follow that the Norse gods are very concerned about this god killer who is roaming around in their territory with a son after essentially bringing about Ragnarok in a foreign land. Odin had his Valkyries collect the best warriors to help him prepare for it, he sacrificed his eye for more wisdom in his efforts to prevent it, and he tried to get rid of Loki's children because they were prophesied to be instrumental in this ultimate fight against the gods. Further proof of this is that there are characters in the game that may refer to Kratos as Spartan. This is also a strong indicator that Kratos' reputation as the ghost of Sparta ends up spreading in the Norse world. I don't know about you guys, but this prospect gives me the chills, and I really hope it's true. It would cast a pretty big shadow over his son, and it ties in with the theme of whether fathers can spare their sons from the cost of their sins. Corey spoke of the film Road to Perdition being an influence, which told a story about a son being put in danger because of his father's dangerous lifestyle as a hitman. We also learned that his father feared that he would follow in his footsteps because of what he had seen between another father and his own son. It was the Norns that foretold of the destruction of the gods and the Norse universe, as they were the guardians of fate in Norse mythology. The main Norns consisted of three divine beings called Erd, Verdandi and Skuld, and they were giantesses that hailed from the land of Jotunheim. They shaped the destiny of every human, animal and god by carving magical runes into the trunk of the world tree Yggdrasil, where they resided. The Norns were very powerful beings that even commanded the respect and envy of Odin himself. Fate is determined at the moment of birth by the Norns, and minor Norns also existed that would attach themselves to a newborn child and oversee their lifespan. If they knew about Kratos' past, it makes sense that they would carve Atreus' fate as the one that ends the reign of another pantheon of gods like his fathers before him. This would answer the question of how we know that Kratos' family curse has passed on to Atreus despite him still being very young, and this prophecy would give Kratos more of a reason to be afraid of his son becoming just like him. The hooded figure that we saw in the demo could very well be a minor Norn that is keeping an eye on Atreus because of who he is prophesied to become. There was also precedent for this in Norse mythology when you look at the fate of Loki's children at the hands of Odin, because the Norns foretold of how they would help bring about doom at Ragnarok. This sort of thing was definitely not unusual within the confines of this mythos. Corey frequently spoke of Kratos wanting to break the cycle that plagued the house of his family by making a change, and this gives us further insight into why the name Atreus was chosen. On the PlayStation blog, he wrote that for Kratos, this change means breaking the cycle of violence, distrust, and deception that his family, the Greek pantheon, perpetuated for so long. That cycle drove a whole host of bad decisions. The ill-fated deal with Ares, the murder of his family, and a rage-fueled descent into madness and vengeance that ultimately ended with the epic destruction of Olympus. He also spoke of Kratos being forced to walk the earth forever, cursed by his past. As well as giving us a tantalizing glimpse at what may have happened at the end of God of War 3, it makes us think about the ways that the curse has manifested itself. We knew the nightmares and visions of his past would forever haunt him, but we now know that he also meant that Kratos would have to deal with this through Atreus. It also sets up an interesting facet of Kratos' character that would drive his decision to change, and that is Kratos secretly blaming himself for what his son is going through. If he had broken the family cycle and abandoned the quest for vengeance that would end in the destruction of Mount Olympus, his son wouldn't even be in danger in the first place. This would explain why he is desperate to make amends for the shortcomings of his past, with the added factor that he doesn't want to fail his son in the same way he failed Deimos. Deimos was of course indirectly affected by Kratos' family curse much like Atreus, except Kratos failed to save him. He was taken prisoner for 30 years because the gods mistook him for being the one that would destroy Mount Olympus, and he spent a lot of that time blaming Kratos for not being able to save him. Perhaps Kratos thinks that in being able to save his son, he can partially make up for what's happened to Deimos, which makes this journey that much more personal. The notion of Kratos having visions of Deimos as an expression of his insecurity over protecting his son, who has found himself in a very similar predicament, sounds pretty compelling. I suspect that the game will also set out to answer the question of whether it's possible to start anew, regardless of how grossly immoral your previous actions were, and this brings me on to logical predictions for how the story will play out based on this revelation. Given that the name Atreus ostensibly carries Greek baggage with it, how can we reconcile this further with the rules of Norse mythology? We previously spoke of him being the Norse god of war, and I always thought that they would leverage the differences between Tyr and the Greek god of war to tell a story about why they were so different, and how the former became the beacon of law, justice and honour. Atreus takes us in the complete opposite direction to a name like Tyr, because Atreus never actually broke the family curse. It was his grandson Orestes. It leads us into thinking that Kratos' son will actually end up like his father, whereas Tyr would be a bit too on the nose in telling us that his son ends up different, and this would have the end result of hurting the way that we see Kratos' struggle play out. But we are transitioning into Norse mythology now, and despite the implications of calling him Atreus, Greek mythology has quite a few differences when paired against Norse, especially in the way they handle fate. While the Norns were divine beings that had more influence over the course of destiny than anyone else, they only decided the earliest form of everybody's destiny. This means that your fate is not final and unalterable, in contrast to the more rigid nature of the Greek concept of fate. All beings have some degree of control in shaping their own destiny, as well as the destinies of others. This could be done passively through your own actions if they are strong enough, but also actively through the practice of magic known as Seder. It is possible that this is what Kratos and his son are after during their adventure. This means that while the name Atreus takes us in one direction, things are still up in the air as to what may happen, given that we are now dealing with a more dynamic model of fate. Atreus is not completely doomed to follow in the footsteps of his family, despite what his name would have you think. It would be a fitting way of signifying the handoff from Greek to Norse mythology, allowing room for it to still be Loki and his children later as the ones that bring about Ragnarok. Corey spoke of Kratos running into people dealing with similar problems the way that he did in his previous adventures, and I can bet that Loki's children will be among them. The name Atreus also fits in perfectly with the symbolism of the new logo. The logo looks like a more circular version of the Odal rune, and it represents ancestral spiritual power and divine inheritance. Its corresponding letter in the Greek alphabet is the iconic Omega symbol, and this also supports the notion of Atreus inheriting his father's legacy, since the Omega sign denotes the end of things. So what else does the name Atreus tell us? It confirms that Kratos named him, and it pretty much guarantees that it is his biological son, even though it hasn't been explicitly stated yet. I don't think it offers any indicator as to who his mother might be, however. It does increase the chances of her being Greek, but she could still be Norse, and we haven't really had any clues as to who she may be. The fact that his son isn't Ulla significantly lowers the chances of it being Sif, and she could be either alive or dead. We don't really have an idea as to what's going on that front. So with all that said and done, how do you think they will weave the theme of inheritable misfortune into the narrative? Will it be through a prophecy, or could it be in another way entirely? At the very least, it has the implication that Atreus is in danger because the Norse gods know about Kratos' past, and I don't think this can be refuted. I think a few people took it too literally when the name was announced because they thought that Kratos' son and mythological Atreus were the same person, but this choice of name carries with it a more metaphorical meaning as opposed to a literal one. For further God of War coverage, remember to keep it locked to my channel. Believe me when I tell you that I cannot wait to have fresh footage to speculate on and analyse. I can almost guarantee that we will see a new gameplay demo at Sony's E3 briefing. If you want a more direct way of speaking to me, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter, as I will be a bit more active on there. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys very soon in the next video.